Alexander Hamilton was a very bombastic and boisterous member of the founding generation, and that personality affected a lot of his politics and his relationships with other people in in his contemporary Congress and within his circle. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the Federalist Papers and some of the issues that he was dealing with during the writing of these papers. And just a little background: so the Federalist Papers were written in order to essentially convince the states to ratify the Constitution. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton wrote these, John Jay as well, wrote these papers to persuade people that the Constitution was not a violation of the spirit of 76, that in fact it was necessary for the sustainability of the Union as a nation going forward. So let's begin. He says, so this was written December 15th, 1787. In addition to the defects of the existing federal system enumerated in the last number, there are others of not less importance which concur in rendering that system altogether unfit for the administration of the affairs of the Union. So he's talking about the Articles of Confederation being unfit to allow the Union to thrive and survive going forward. The want of a power to regulate commerce is by all parties allowed to be of the number. The utility of such a power has been anticipated under the first head of our inquiries, and for this reason, as well as from the universal conviction entertained upon the subject, little needed to be added in this place. It is indeed evident, on the most superficial view, that there is no object, either as it respects the interests of trade or finance, that more strongly demands a federal superintendence. So what he's saying is that no issue is more important than the issue of interstate commerce and commerce in general to the survival of the Union. This is super important. It was needed to help pay off the debt that had been accumulated because of the Revolutionary War, and that had been assumed by the federal government from the states, or was going to be. And this was the only way that the United States was going to be able to gain prowess in its new position as a young nation. And Hamilton was very adamant about this. He continues, the want of it has already operated as a bar to the formation of beneficial treaties with foreign powers, and has given occasions of dissatisfaction between the states. No nation acquainted with the nature of our political association would be unwise enough to enter into stipulations with the United States by which they conceded privileges of any importance to them, while they were apprised that the engagements on the part of the Union might at any moment be violated by its members, and while they found from experience that they might enjoy every advantage they desired in our markets, without granting us any return but such as their monetary convenience might suggest. It is not, therefore, to be wondered that Mr. Jenkinson, in ushering into the House of Commons a bill for regulating the temporary intercourse between the two countries, should preface its introduction by a declaration that similar provisions in former bills had been found to answer every purpose to the commerce of Great Britain, and that it would be prudent to persist in the plan until it should appear whether the American government was likely or not to acquire greater consistency. So that's a lot to take in, but we can try to break it down. So he says, no nation acquainted with the nature of the political association. So no nation that's familiar with the political stance of the United States would. So basically, what he's saying here is that we're not taxing domestic goods, and that basically the American Republic was being taken advantage of, and that the federal government had the power, or should have the power, to be able to do something about this. He also says that similar provisions in former bills had been found to answer every purpose to the commerce of Great Britain, and that it would be prudent so he's saying it would be prudent to do the same thing, to form treaties with other trading nations, because these relationships will help solidify the American Republic. It says, until it should appear whether the American government was likely or not to acquire greater consistency. So this kind of plays along with Hamilton's personality as well, as he's saying, we don't know if this is going to work. And in order to make sure that it's going to work and that that the United States has a future, then we must establish some sort of place in the world. And that place is in regards to commerce and trade. So continuing on. Several states have endeavored by separate prohibitions, restrictions, and exclusions to influence the conduct of that kingdom in this particular. But the want of concert arising from the want of a general authority and from clashing and dissimilar views in the state has hitherto frustrated every experiment of the kind, and will continue to do so as long as the same obstacles to a uniformity of measures continue to exist. So what he's really getting at here is the fact that there are different interests in the South and in the North, and it's almost a jab saying that, well, we haven't been able to get these people to agree with us, so we haven't been able to make a legitimate treaty. And I believe he's referring to the South and their reservations about getting into a treaty, especially with England, such as the Jay Treaty, or France, for that matter. So he says, the interfering and unneighborly regulations of some states, contrary to the true spirit of the Union, have, in different instances, given just cause of umbrage and complaint to others, and it is to be feared that examples of this nature, if not restrained by a national control, would be multiplied and extended till they became not less serious sources of animosity and discord than injurious impediments to the intercourse between the different parts of the Confederacy. He quotes, the commerce of the German Empire is in continual trammels from the multiplicity of the duties which the several princes and states exact upon the merchandises passing through their territories. So he's trying to say that it doesn't make sense to have individual states create this policy. We're a nation, we're a union. It's too complicated. It hasn't worked in Germany. They've tried it. It's almost like the situation with the Articles of Confederation, where the different states had different systems of money. It just makes it very difficult to trade. There's different laws. Somebody crossing into Virginia versus let's say the Carolinas, they don't know whether the laws are the same, so whether they have to pay another tax. It's just too complicated, and it doesn't make any sense. He continues on by means of which the fine streams and navigable rivers of which Germany is so happily watered and rendered almost useless. So there's too many places for people to travel and trade and that kind of thing. There's no way that each principality or state, in our case, is going to be able to regulate commerce on their own. Though the genius of the people of this country might never permit this description to be strictly applicable to us, yet we may reasonably expect, from the gradual conflicts of state regulations, that the citizens of each would at length come to be considered and treated by the others in no light better than that of foreigners and aliens. So that is kind of sinister in its implication. He's saying that if we don't have a national policy on commerce, then everyone is going to treat each other as if they are aliens. Everyone is going to treat each other as if they're their own country. And this really hints at Hamilton's personal opinion on what the republic should be. He believes there should be a central financial bank and financial power, that financial center should have influence in the government, and that those interests should be represented. He believes in a strong federal government that regulates commerce nationally. So that last statement was very indicative of how Hamilton felt, but it was also a good tactic because people saw how difficult it was to interact under the Articles, and they realized to a certain extent, even in the South, that something had to be done to make things easier to trade. And particularly in the North, because they were a manufacturing economy, but it still was a problem in the South. I mean, you have different types of money, you have different types of laws and different trade laws, different taxes, that kind of thing. So he kind of switches gears here. He says, the power of raising armies by the most obvious construction of the Articles of the Confederation is merely a power of making requisitions upon the states for quotas of men. This practice in the course of the late war was found replete with obstructions to a vigorous and to an economical system of defense. It gave birth to a competition between the states which created a kind of auction for men. So he's really getting at the fact that the federal government needs the power to raise an army, and that the states raising militias and just supplying men to the federal government really didn't work. It wasn't economical, it took too long, and it wasn't efficient and effective. The immediate... wait, hold on. He continues on. The hope of a still further increase afforded an inducement to those who were disposed to serve to procrastinate their enlistment and disincline them from engaging for any considerable periods. Hence, slow and scanty levies of men, in the most critical emergencies of our affairs, short enlistments at an unparalleled expense, continual fluctuations in the troops, ruinous to their discipline and subjecting to the public safety frequently to the perilous crisis of a disbanded army. So throughout history, obviously, disbanded armies have been a problem, and Hamilton sees this and he says, look, we can't have this. We need a federal government who can pay these people consistently, who can enforce their contracts, who doesn't just let them leave in the middle of a battle. This is really, really important to Hamilton. So there's two different issues going on here. So the first issue, he's saying, okay, look, we need some way to regulate commerce because the whole Articles of Confederation, this loose union, doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. We're not respected in the eyes of other nations, and we won't be able to pay off our debt if we don't do something to regulate commerce. That's number one. Number two is that the military is incredibly important, and that kind of ties into commerce really, and Hamilton's background as a military man really kind of, I'm sure, persuades him to say some of these things. But he's saying that the federal government needs a way to raise an army, and that it can't rely on the states to compete to supply men to the federal army. So these arguments show, the difficulties in ratifying the Constitution, why some people didn't agree with it, and it really gives you an insight into Alexander Hamilton's personal view of what the Republic should be, and gives you some insight into his personality. Okay, thank you guys.